A reading of the first chapter of The Other Forest by Danielle Koehler. To Nwen, Ruda, Tuku, and all the other injured, displaced, and orphaned wildlife worldwide, and to the people who dedicate their lives to protecting them. Chapter 1. Welcome to the Ring of Fire. There were only 3 things Olivia knew about Lenka. 1. Her grandparents lived there. She hadn't seen them in years. 2. The people spoke Spanish. She didn't. 3. It was at the literal end of the earth. She had to turn a globe upside down to even find it. Olivia slumped against the car window, watching the deep blue of the Pacific Ocean blur past. At home, she could spend hours watching the waves crash, but unlike the sparkling turquoise of her ocean, this one looked dark, cold, and empty. There were no dolphins or surfers or kids boogie boarding, nothing but sad emptiness stretching into infinity. Unsticking her curls from the misty glass, Olivia dropped her gaze to the book in her lap. Volcanology of Chile. It was a recent airport purchase that her mother had hoped would cheer her up. As much as Olivia hated to admit it, her mom was right. At least a little. According to the introduction, Chile had more than 500 active volcanoes, mostly due to its location smack dab on the Ring of Fire, sandwiched between the Peru-Chile Oceanic Trench in the west and the Andes Mountains in the east, a perfect recipe for volcanic activity. "Did you read about Volcán Calbuco yet, Livy?" asked a cheerful voice from the front seat. Olivia kept her eyes glued to the pages. She hated being called Livy. That was what Dad used to call her. He had a nickname for everyone, Livy or Liv Bug for her, Captain Redbeard for himself, and Peppy Peppa for Ma, who was always smiling. Even now, after everything, she still wore that stupid grin. "On a clear day, you'd be able to see the top of it over there." Ma tapped the window to their left, not noticing Olivia's silent treatment. Olivia stared out at the thousands of prehistoric trees climbing up the mountain slopes before vanishing into a thick white mist. The forest looked like something ripped out of the pages of a dark fairy tale about witches and ancient magic. She vaguely remembered some old legend her grandmother used to tell her about a strange goblin-like creature living in the forest. It made sense why people here might believe that, but Olivia was sure it was only a myth, something made up. She was having a hard enough time imagining a real-life volcano hiding back there, let alone mythical creatures. Her curiosity getting the better of her, she flipped through the book until finding a photo of a bumpy, snow-covered volcano. Calbuco, read the text, is an extremely explosive stratovolcano in the lakes region of southern Chile. Once considered to be among the most active volcanoes in the country, it has remained dormant since its last eruption in 1972. Olivia let a smile slip as she reread the line, extremely explosive stratovolcano. Those were the best kind, like Mount Vesuvius in Italy and Mount St. Helens in Washington State. Ever since she'd studied them in Mr. Hughes' earth science class last year, she'd become a tiny bit obsessed. She had read everything she could find about the townspeople of Pompeii, who never seemed concerned with the looming mountain peak, or all the earthquakes they were all too used to, until one day when they awoke to a cloud of ash. If there was one thing Olivia had learned, it was that no matter how long a volcano pretended to be a sleepy little mountain, sooner or later it was bound to wake up and remember what it really was. Olivia snuck a peek at the rear-view mirror, which reflected Ma's watchful eyes. Snapping back to a scowl, she reminded herself that no matter how undeniably cool the nearby volcanoes were, she must show absolutely zero interest in being here. If she stuck to this plan, Ma would soon see that this was all a huge mistake, and they'd move back to Virginia in no time. Virginia, home, where she had friends, like Jill and Mandy and Eli and Lily and all the other scouts, and her shooting sharks teammates, and... A loud snore startled her. The culprit, her dog Max, was splayed out next to her, belly up and fast asleep. Olivia scratched him in the secret spot that only she could find. Right on cue, his foot sprang into action like a lawnmower revving up. Olivia smiled. "At least I still have you," she sighed. "Look! They're about your age!" Ma pointed out the window at a group of boys playing soccer next to a small chapel with a weird pointy roof. "Let's say hi!" Olivia shot her a horrified look. Right as she opened her mouth to speak, a honk honk rang out of the car. One of the soccer players froze mid-kick and began jumping up and down, waving at them. Another player immediately stole the ball from him. The first boy's teammates threw their hands in the air, a few of them glaring at the offending vehicle. Olivia slid down in her seat, hiding her burning cheeks from sight. Ma just had to give me the worst first impression, didn't she? Not that it mattered, since she was doomed to a friendless existence here anyways because of the whole language issue, which is what Miss Judy used to call it during their totally normal weekly counseling sessions. But still, she preferred not to add an embarrassing mother issue on top of that. 5 minutes later, the car parked next to a wooden cabin with a tall trail of smoke puffing out its chimney. In the yard, several black and white hens roamed between the ferns. Olivia frowned. There was no fence or anything keeping them in. "Remember this?" Ma twisted around. Her bright brown eyes were wide with anticipation. The same brown eyes that had been passed down to Olivia, although she would have preferred receiving her dad's light blues. All she'd gotten from him was a sprinkling of freckles on her cheeks and a tiny dash of fire in her hair. Olivia raised one defiant eyebrow in response. "No? Well, maybe you were too young," Ma continued as sweetly as ever. "Come on, let's go in." Olivia sighed. So this is it, our new... She shook her head and began to pack her things into her backpack as slowly as humanly possible. Max's doggy treats and water bowl, the volcanology book, half a chocolate bar stashed for later. Only one thing left, but he was a little too big to fit in her backpack. Olivia leaned in and booped Max on the nose. He blinked at her, yawned, and dropped his head back down. Clearly the sleeping pills they'd given him for the plane ride hadn't worn off. "Come on, Max. If I have to go in, so do you." Olivia tugged on his legs, but he refused to budge. Ma walked by carrying a big black suitcase and laughed. "Here in Chile we call that por la razón o por la fuerza." Olivia dropped Max's limbs. "English, please, Josefina," she snarked. Ma rolled her eyes in the same annoyingly playful way she always did when Olivia called her by her real first name. She banged on the front door and called back, "You know you're going to have to actually learn Spanish now, right?" Before Olivia could respond, a short round woman flung open the door. She was covered in flour from the plaid apron tied around her waist to her head, where clumps of white dusted her short black hair. Olivia's grandmother looked mostly as Olivia remembered her, with a few more wrinkles and rolls here and there. "Hola, Pepa, mi hija preciosa!" she squeaked, throwing her arms around Olivia's mother and kissing her on the cheek. "Hola, mamá," replied Ma. The two women happily chit-chatted for a few moments until Olivia's grandmother turned to face her. "Hola, mi princesa!" Before Olivia could frown at being called a princess, she was scooped into her grandmother's plump arms and given one big kiss on the cheek. "Hola, Abu," she groaned. Having emerged from the car, Max stretched his paws out in front of him, shook the sleep from his body, and promptly trotted into the house. Abu released Olivia, shrieking something about that perro being in her casa. "Mamá, te dije," said Ma. "Pero no me dijiste," Abu began to argue. Olivia's head shot from one woman to the other, waiting for someone to explain. But they kept speaking Spanish until Olivia's mother placed one thin finger on Abu's lips, flashed her charming Pepi Pepa smile, and said, "Max is de Olivia, son inseparables, okay?" Abu opened her mouth once more, but with a quick glance at Olivia, she gave one grumpy nod, and that was it. Inseparables. That was easy enough to understand, and what a perfect word to describe Max and Olivia. Ever since the day she had found him abandoned in the state park and convinced her parents to keep him, which may have taken a tiny amount of begging and crying, they'd truly been inseparable. And boy, was she glad that she'd found him when she did, as he was the only thing getting her through all this. As soon as Olivia stepped inside, she inhaled the smell of baked bread and melted cheese. It was undoubtedly coming from the old wood-burning stove that sat in the middle of the room. That didn't seem like a normal place for a stove, but then again, nothing seemed normal here. Unlike her bright and beachy home in Virginia, everything here was bathed in boring shades of beige and brown. Olivia scanned the cabin for the smallest pop of color, but everything from the roof to the floor was covered in wood or wool. Finally, her eyes landed on the couch, where a suspiciously bright neon pink ball of yarn sat next to two cushions embroidered with the most beautiful blue and orange birds. After removing her oversized bomber jacket and boots, Olivia sat on the couch to examine the birds. The light from the stove bounced off their colorful threads, making their wings sparkle ever so slightly. They didn't look like any birds she recognized, which was saying a lot considering she'd received the birdwatching badge just last year. As Olivia caught herself wondering, no, hoping to see these birds in the wild, Max jumped up next to her. Apparently, he'd already completed his investigation of all the new smells the cabin had to offer, and was now ready for his third nap of the day. Olivia smiled as he curled into a neat little ball. Always the big spoon, she lay behind him and squeezed her fingers into his warm belly. Nestling her face into his neck, she closed her eyes, breathing in his chamomile puppy shampoo, which would lull her to sleep. Maybe then she'd wake up and this all would have been only a bad dream. The front door flew open and a pair of heavy boots stomped inside. "Peppa!" boomed a man's voice. "Hola, papa!" replied Ma. Olivia peeked open an eye and was startled by the sight of the old man at the door. She hardly recognized him as her grandfather. His hair was now completely white and hung down by his shoulders. It matched the silver beard hiding the bottom half of his face. He wore a black beret, an olive green fisherman's vest, and large rubber boots covered in mud. When he saw Max, his eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Un perrito!" He clapped his hands on his thighs. Max immediately jumped off the couch, greeting the old man with one long, wet kiss. Not quick enough to dodge Max's helicopter tail, Abu squealed like a frightened piglet as it thwacked her leg. Olivia's grandfather chuckled as he wiped the slobber from his cheek. "Qué buen perro! He is yours?" He held out his hand to pull Olivia up from the couch. "Hi, Tata. Yeah, he's—" Before she could complete her sentence, she was pulled into a big bear hug. When her grandfather released her, he bent to meet her eye level. "How is my favorite nieta? I hear you are a little gruñona, no?" "Grumpy," Ma offered as a translation. Before Olivia could retort, Tata continued. "Escucha. First thing tomorrow we go, a pasear en el bosque." "Go for a walk in the woods," said Ma. "I got it, thanks," replied Olivia, although she certainly hadn't gotten it at all. "Yes," continued Tata. "It helped clear your head." He poked her and winked. Ma raised her eyebrows. "Papa, are you sure it's safe?" "Of course, don't be worried." "But Mama mentioned something about some attacks from—" "Don't listen her," he interrupted, shooting Abu an angry glare. "She think forest is full of demonios como el trauco." Olivia's eyes widened. She didn't know what the word trauco meant, but it sounded like maybe the forest really was full of witches and ancient magic. Tata held a hand to his face to shield it from Abu's view, and with the other hand he drew a small circle near his temple while mouthing the word loca. Olivia clamped her hand over her mouth to suppress a giggle. Abu scoffed, and Tata blew her a kiss, which she swatted away. "So, were there attacks or not?" Olivia asked, unable to resist. "Well, yes, but not— Ay, es que—" Tata frowned, searching for his next words. "That many, many years ago, before you born, so don't be worried. Nothing scary in forest now, not even one animal, all gone. Today I try fish, and nada." Olivia frowned so deep it hurt. She knew she should be relieved that the forest was safe, or whatever, but she couldn't help feeling upset that there were no animals anywhere. She glanced at the beautiful embroidered cushions and felt her heart sink. "How is that even possible? Where did they all go?" she pouted. Tata placed his hands on his knees and motioned for Olivia to move in closer. Hide. All of them, he whispered. You help me find them? Olivia grinned and nodded, forgetting her zero-interest rule. Catching herself, she glanced nervously at her mother, who had her back turned in that moment. Phew! Close one. Good. Tomorrow we go. Tata smiled, patting Olivia on the shoulder. Abu sighed. Tú sabes que hay algo malo en ese bosque. Olivia only understood the word malo, but the message was clear. Let's eat, I'm starving, Ma interjected before Tata could respond. They continued speaking Spanish all throughout dinner. The only thing Olivia understood, unfortunately, was the name George. It was said in that same hushed tone that people used when they said things like, I'm so sorry for your loss, and if there's anything we can do. Though they never said Olivia's name, several worried glances in her direction confirmed her suspicion that they were also talking about her. Unable and unwilling to participate in the conversation, Olivia resigned herself to angrily poking at the slimy brown seaweed on her plate. It was cut into bite-sized pieces and sprinkled with onions and herbs, none of which managed to mask its terrible flavor. She swallowed as much as she could and tried to give the rest to Max, her faithful garbage disposal, but even he wouldn't eat the stuff. The others were eating Abu's homemade empanadas de pino. Though they smelled delicious, Olivia had been forced to pass, as she recently made the decision to never eat a dead animal again. Abu appeared quite distressed with this news. After rummaging through the fridge, she found one leftover container with no meat. As she dumped the ensalada de cochayuyo on Olivia's plate, she mumbled something that sounded like morir de hambre. As Olivia helped clear the table, she caught Tata sneaking scraps of food to Max. Tomorrow, you come with us. Yes, you smell animals. Sí, vamos al bosque. Basta, yelled Abu. She had turned in time to see Max catch a piece of sausage. She pointed at Max and Tata, then outside, yelling something that Olivia assumed was a threat to kick them both out. Out of breath, Abu concluded her angry speech with, Tu obsesión con ese bosque, ojalá lo talen todo. Whatever Abu had said, Tata did not like it one bit. His face flushed as he kicked out his chair and stomped out of the room. Olivia looked at Ma to see if she would offer a translation, but she just nervously smiled and scooped up as many dirty plates as she could hold. At last excused to go to bed, Olivia slipped under the covers. She was so tired from all the travel that she didn't even mind the lumpy pillow or musty-smelling sheets. Drawing circles over Max's tummy, she wondered what Abu had said that made Tata so angry. But of the thousands of words she didn't understand, the ones that kept clawing their way back into her head were demonios como el trauco. What was a trauco? Too tired to rummage through her suitcase to find her dictionary, she rolled onto her side and turned off the light. Whatever it meant, tomorrow she would find out.